But once the paper market and the tangible, the physical market are divorced, it'll be one of those emperor's new clothes moments where everyone realizes that we are in the midst of massive manipulation, and the dollar figure that's cited in the newspapers or online for silver bears no relationship with reality whatsoever. We're going to see $50 physical silver prices long before we see $50 paper silver prices.
Here at Liberty and Finance, we're licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. We are standing by the inventory, ready to make sure you get what you need, even into the wee hours of night and on weekends, because preparedness doesn't stop. Call us 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're glad to have this knowledgeable and renowned returning guest. James Rawles is the founder of SurvivalBlog.com. He joins us again this Tuesday, March 29th, 2022. James, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Whenever we put out a call for viewers' questions ahead of your arrival, we get swamped, so we won't be able to get through all of these, but I see some major themes emerging from the questions that have been submitted, and I will try to question along those themes, and where I can name specific viewers who have submitted them, I will. Otherwise, please be aware, people, that if I'm not mentioning your name, it's probably because yours was in line with several other questions. One of them that's very much in our face right now, and we won't dwell on it, but let's at least touch on it because it's important, is the current Russia-Ukraine conflict that's got the eyes of obviously the Eurozone and the U.S. and the world. Consequences of that to our preparedness and the threats that we face to our freedom and our futures as families and as a country. What are your key takeaways so far about the impact to us, the implications to us of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and America's involvement or lack thereof?
Well, sure. Yeah. Here in the United States, the main impact we're going to feel will be economic. Obviously, the Ukraine invasion has absolutely thrown a monkey wrench into the commodities market. If you look at just the chaos that took place 2 weeks ago with the London Metals Exchange and the nickel market, that was just absolutely unprecedented. And the market shut down for more than a week, which was also unprecedented. So I think we're going to see a lot more situations like that come up where the commodities markets get thrown into a tizzy. There could be some pretty major moves on interest rates in Central Europe and on the periphery of Europe, both in the Baltic states and down in the Balkans and down with Italy and Spain. We could see some pretty large swings in interest rates. Anytime there's a big move in interest rates, that has an effect on credit derivatives. And if the derivatives market is so finely tuned, it does wonderfully well at managing risk when interest rates move, a few basis points. Nothing more than, 0.2 to 0.3 of a percentage point in interest rate changes. The derivatives do a fantastic jobs. But when there's a big swing in interest rates, that's where you could end up with a severe problem in derivatives. You could actually have disappearing counterparties and an absolute chaos in the derivatives market. So people need to watch credit default swaps and other interest rate dependent securities or derivatives very closely and recognize that and also looking at what's going on in China right now, for example, both the Ukraine situation and China's internal problems with their real estate bubble and their own commodities bubble, there are some pretty severe implications, so severe repercussions that will be felt by American consumers. The availability of credit, if interest rates rise substantially, it could very well shut down the housing market, and it could also have a severe impact on equities markets, and also tangentially the bond market. So we need to watch what's going on in Ukraine and all the impact of the sanctions on Russia and counter sanctions. And then the biggest right now that's going on is probably the effect on the petrodollar. Russia is talking about demanding that the Western European nations pay for their natural gas in rubles. And that has the NATO countries absolutely screaming right now. So if we see an end of the dollar as a reserve currency, or at least the end of the petrodollar as we know it, that too could have some very severe repercussions here in the States.
Right. You just rattled through about 4 of the questions I was going to ask you. We had Irish AJW2 talked about the effort to de-dollarize the world markets seeming to gone into a whole new gear in the last 5 weeks. You just touched on that as far as energy for rubles only from Europe to Russia. We had another one about what about the Ukraine war potential impact on China's geopolitical ambitions, including China's takeover of Taiwan? Do you foresee any sort of escalation, broadening of the conflagration outside of Russia?
Yeah, actually, I'm surprised that China didn't take advantage this last month and go ahead and launch an invasion of Taiwan. I think that is almost inevitable because the nationalist Chinese government of Taiwan is essentially intractable. They do not want to reunify with mainland China as long as China is a dictatorial, tyrannical power. So I think at some point, a invasion of Taiwan is almost inevitable, unless there's some unforeseen circumstance that comes up. I think that's inevitable. I think that the Biden administration, if they were smart, which obviously they are not, they should be arming Taiwan very heavily right now. They should be sending just as many arms to Taiwan as they are Ukraine, because that actually is a huge risk. And the only way to mitigate that risk is to have Taiwan be a very tough nut to crack for the Chinese. And that would mean more elaborate air defense systems, both man-pads, which are man-portable air defense systems, and the larger missile systems that are capable of taking down targets at high altitude, and a proliferation of anti-tank guided missiles, ATGMs, all the way from shoulder-fired to larger systems like the TOW-2, for example, which is usually vehicular mounted. We should be proliferating those kind of smart weapons and working on intelligence sharing with Taiwan to prevent an invasion of Taiwan. Because at this point, we are looking at the prospect of World War III being fought on at least 2 fronts.
Speaking of World War III, I want to broaden it out now beyond geopolitical considerations. There's something extraordinary going on, and has been for the past 2 years at least. It's become quite evident to people that we're not in Kansas anymore. There seems to be on the eyes and in the minds of many people who've lived through unprecedented, I would say, globally synchronized lockdowns, impositions of, one could argue, unconstitutional restrictions on people's speech, on their ability to gather together, and talking about taking away, rights to weapons that would help them to be, resist threats, both foreign and domestic, that sort of thing. Not just in the U.S., but in, start naming the countries: Austria, Australia, France, on and on around the world. People have often started to characterize this as being behind enemy lines in World War III that's been undeclared, and we're all wondering, well, who's the real enemy? And feeling often misdirected by the mainstream media to say, well, this is your latest threat, that's your latest threat, and just changing the subject and moving on to keep us divided and keep us off our balance, and not really focusing on the fact that we're losing freedom wholesale. So could you broaden out your comments on that proposition? Do you perceive, you mentioned the word World War III, and you were talking about it in the sort of traditional sense of theaters of armed conflict, that sort of thing. But what about this arguably less armed conflict that's stripping us away without a shot being fired in many cases of our civil rights and our rights, constitutional rights, et cetera, not just in the U.S., but globally?
Well, I think any modern war is going to be a fourth generation war, and that has several aspects to it. There's usually an information war, and what we've seen going on in Ukraine, that is basically a propaganda war. There's so many aspects to this, but if you're looking at a World War III scenario, we are already in a fight for our rights. And you mentioned the right to peaceably assemble, redress of grievances. Then with the lockdowns that we saw with COVID, I find it really curious that we went immediately from COVID and its lockdowns and its draconian measures right into the Ukraine crisis and incredibly high fuel prices, which in effect are going to lock people down and restrict their ability to travel. And of course, we're probably also going to see some pretty severe shortages as the Ukraine crisis spreads out over the globe economically in terms of trade, commerce, and the Forex. We're probably going to see some pretty severe shortages that develop, not just with microchips, but with staple foods on our store shelves. And of course, America's in the midst of a growing inflation problem. And I think it's only going to get worse. And I think synergistically, the supply chain shortages and inflation are going to create some pretty severe perturbations of the market. We're going to see shortages. We're going to see radically higher prices, and we'll see government reaction to all of those that may not be in the form that we like. There may be rationing, there may be wage and price controls, all the usual government overreaction that we saw most recently back in the 1970s. We're going to see a replay of that. We may very well be in a period of stagflation, which is a stagnating economy with inflation. Folks need to be ready for that. And if they don't already have a good 2 years worth of food set aside, they need to work toward that goal, because we may see disruptions that are to the extent that people may need to get into their food storage and to sustain their family much sooner than they think.
I guess I'll take this opportunity. You and I were speaking just before we got started about my wife and my ongoing search for a relocation homestead that's more self-sustainable than the suburban HOA situation we've been in for the last decade. And we are specifically looking for lakeshore living and enough land that we could have significant gardening and perhaps even chickens, that sort of thing, and without restrictions on those, and basically having a high volume, water resource and protein resource and that sort of thing. It's been challenging. And any new thoughts that you have? We've certainly talked to you about strategic relocation in the past, but just in this last couple of months, as more and more of the government's hand has been revealed as far as the types of restrictions that they have been willing to, and maybe willing to, go beyond clamping down on people's lives, or the warnings that have even come out, President Biden just last week talking about expecting food shortages that are going to be painful. Any new revelations to you that would guide people in making strategic relocations about how they should prioritize that, or the urgency?
Well, I do think it is quite urgent, and especially with interest rates rising, if anyone plans to get a mortgage to make a move, the number of qualified buyers is going to get smaller and smaller as time goes on. With inflation, with obviously higher land prices, higher development costs. If someone plans to build, there's very few contractors available. A lot of them went out of business with the COVID pandemic. The few that are in business have booked orders. Just try to have a large workshop built on a property right now. You're looking at a 6-month wait or more to have a building put up. So people need to plan ahead for all of that. If they do plan to move, they ought to accelerate those plans and make it happen while there's still reasonable property available. And it's all going to be unreasonable very shortly. You mentioned the Biden administration. One thing that they announced just a couple of days ago is their endorsement of a new tax plan for multimillionaires. And I've got to warn folks, with mass inflation, we'll all be multimillionaires in a few years. It's just those millions won't be worth very much. The problem is the traditional bracket creep that we've seen will be the least of our problems. If we all qualify as multimillionaires, we're all going to be in that super high tax bracket.
Yeah, that's not so far-fetched. If people haven't been paying attention to this, the alternative minimum tax, ARM, that AMT, that's in your tax return already, was originally supposedly put in the 1970s to catch like the top 0.5% or something like that of ultra rich who had all these loopholes or something. But it has not been indexed for inflation. And now it's some huge percentage. I can't remember, but it's more than a third, I think, of all taxpayers are subject to it now. And that's only going to increase. So it's one of those cowardly stealth taxes that gets put in place, and people think it sounds good in the beginning. It's always good idea if it's going to be someone else's money. But the fact that it's put in place by policy, start to capture a wider and wider net until it basically, most people are subject to it.
Well, very few people even recognize the full implications of mass inflation on taxation. And in effect, inflation is a hidden form of taxation, just in and of itself, not even with bracket creep, because the government is able to repay its debt with cheap dollars as they inflate the currency. So it's a double form of taxation. I do recommend that people think things through very seriously and readjust their portfolios toward tangible investments so that they will spare themselves most of the pain of mass inflation. Because if you stay in dollar-denominated investments, a lot of those are going to be absolutely wiped out by inflation. And certainly anyone who's on a fixed income, any retirees who are dependent upon a pension, an annuity, or Social Security, they're going to be absolutely wiped out. So people need to think this through and say, well, what if inflation goes double digit? And what if a year or two later, it goes triple digit? At that point, we can pretty well kiss our economy goodbye. And at that point, we will be very dependent on ourselves, on self-sufficiency, because when food is not affordable in stores, your only real option will be that which we can raise ourselves, livestock, small livestock, large livestock, gardening, and hunting and fishing, or that which we can barter for with our neighbors who do hunt, fish, garden, or raise livestock. That barter potential, again, goes back to tangibles. If you have most of your net worth in tangibles, you'll always have, if they're compact, transportable, fungible, you're going to end up with items that will be desirable for barter, and that even if you don't raise food yourself, your family will never starve.
If we could take that discussion a little deeper, we have a question from a viewer, and I'd like to expand on it based on something you said a few minutes ago. Eric MC asks, will silver ever be allowed to trade freely? It continues to get mythically slammed down. So that's one question, but it's related to one, I think, that you talked about earlier, where the nickel market basically blew up 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, same thing could happen with silver.
That's the thing. And then you also mentioned in passing, government-imposed wage and price controls supposedly to be the medicine to fix an illness of a runaway inflation. If it gets determined by the government or the banks that are influencing government that runaway gold or silver prices is not a good thing for whatever reason, and I can think of several that might be used to justify that, would there be, even if it's not precedented, the ability for them to impose essentially price controls officially, not just unofficially, as may have been happening for decades?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The silver market is already highly manipulated. And a lot of people who hold, we're talking institutional investors here that hold large short positions, of course, obviously have a vested interest in suppressing the price of silver. And they've been very successful at that, because the silver market is a very thin market. But one aspect of a thin market that's probably going to come back and bite the shorts is the fact that a thin market can get away from manipulators very quickly, just like we saw with the nickel market a couple of weeks ago, where the price of nickel, even though they were trying to manipulate it down, got away from them, and it just absolutely exploded. So because it's a thin market, the same thing could happen with silver. And right now, the ratio of silver to gold should be somewhere around 20-1. Well, anywhere above 50-1 is not realistic. And right now we're looking at what, in the 80s? I think that we're going to see a correction there where gold may kind of level off, but then silver will take off. And once silver takes off to the point, because silver being the poor man's gold, once small investors start piling into silver, there'll be no way they can stop the silver market. It's going to run up to the point where we have $100 per troy ounce silver. The shorts are going to be absolutely squeezed out of the market. They're going to be facing huge margin calls. They're going to be wiped out. At that point, yes, we could see some government intervention. And if history has taught us anything, is that wage and price controls never work. They're always misapplied, and they always cause pain, and they basically disrupt a free market.
So, I mean, there's been some discussion, I guess, vigorous discussion over the past decade or so about whether the metals markets are manipulated, and if they are, who's actually doing it. There's been denial of it officially by like JP Morgan and Bank of America. And so we're just doing hedging on part of our clients, that sort of thing. Others have claimed, no, you're following the bidding of the Treasury or the central banks or whatever to do what they tell you to is necessary, and along the way being protected by CFTC that looks the other way and does not get involved when there's incredibly concentrated actions that are taken that just defy logic. A year and a half's worth of global mine supply of silver being dumped on the market in the overnight hours when there's a thinly traded market that perturbs the price by dollars, which is not at all effective if that's what you wanted to do, is to hedge and protect your price position, et cetera. Things like that, and lack of prosecution. So would this be a case if the runaway price because of popular demand of the physical supply on the markets caused a run-up in price that basically threatened to financially injure those major bullion banks that have large short positions? Would it be the time for the government to come to the rescue? You've done our bidding, and now we're going to come and make sure you don't get hurt by this. And again, the small guy, as we saw on the nickel market, not being able to not the forces of nature not being allowed to take their course.
It's happened before when the Hunt brothers tried to corner the silver market 40 years ago. The COMEX literally changed their rules overnight and stopped the run on silver. And in fact, one of the rules they changed was they said, okay, if you've got COMEX futures contracts, those can now only be settled in dollars, not in silver. You can't take physical delivery of silver unless you're the Eastman Kodak company, because you actually physically need that silver. They told everybody else, you can't take possession, you can't take delivery of the silver when those futures contracts mature. So yes, that kind of manipulation has been done before. If the government does it, it'll be even more heavy-handed. But again, it's a thin market. I think that the chances are that the ability of the 200 or 300 people who currently control the silver market to maintain that control is going to slip away. The next time we see the generally dumb public wake up and start saying, oh, I need to get some silver. Well, the silver market is incredibly small. It's a very thin market. And even if just 2% or 3% more of the population decided they wanted to put, say, 20% of their liquid wealth into silver, there's not enough silver in the world to do that. So obviously, silver is just going to go to the moon overnight. Yes, the COMEX and the LME and the other, major markets can try to manipulate the paper silver market, but they cannot stop the physical market. In fact, right now we're seeing the premiums on silver at absurd level. We're looking at $25 silver, but a $9 or $10 premium to buy a U.S. American Eagle silver 1 ounce coin.
Well, that was about a month ago. Now it's like 12 to 14. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously the physical market is beyond their grasp, but the manipulators can certainly continue to try to manipulate the paper silver market. But once the paper market and the the physical market are divorced, it'll be one of those emperor's new clothes moments where everyone realizes that we are in the midst of massive manipulation, and the dollar figure that's cited in the newspapers or online for silver bears no relationship with reality whatsoever. We're going to see $50 physical silver prices long before we see $50 paper silver prices.
Now, still on the topic of tangibles, but back to what you were talking about like food supply and sustainable living on the household and community level. Keith Rosen says, how can we influence local governments to realize our food supply is in trouble and get them to act? So I like two aspects of that. One is that Keith is focusing on the necessity of securing your food supply. And the second is this idea of local solutions. Can you talk to us about both of those?
Yeah, and I think most solutions do in a free market. Most solutions do come from the bottom up. They start at the community level, and there are existing forces and factors already in play in American markets for the food supply that a lot of people have never heard of or don't take advantage of. One is CSA, which is the Community's Sustainable Agriculture Movement. And tied in closely with that is the farmers market movement. And I think, especially as inflation kicks in, we're going to see a huge interest in gardening and community agriculture and farmers markets. And that's where we're going to see barter come into play. We'll see people at farmers markets saying, we accept silver in payment, and we'll even pay a premium if you pay in silver. That's where that kind of change is going to come in. It'll be at the community level. Attempting to fix a political situation at the national level at this point is very, very difficult, if not impossible. We as individual taxpayers and constituents can write letters to our congressmen until we're blue in the face, and they will be absolutely ignored because they're career politicians. So if we start at the community level, reality will come into play and trickle up. It's not going to trickle down from the District of Criminals.
So beyond individual actions like start gardening yourself, start supporting a community-supported agriculture, CSA, in your local area, start attending your farmers market and getting your food directly from local growers. Is there anything you think, specifically to the questioner's slant on that, can we influence local governments to take action?
Well, you can encourage your local government to start with your county commissioners and also your local county fair board. Most people don't even realize that most county fairs have a board of directors that's a lot like either a school district board or something like that, or a county board of supervisors. Well, each county fair usually has a board. You can petition the board of your county for your county fair to set up. They've got the county fairgrounds there year round. 11 months of the year, most county fairgrounds are horribly underutilized. They have a few special events that come through, but their big thing every year is the county fair every summer. Well, you need to petition your county fair board and say, why don't you have a farmer's market in one of the halls of the county fairgrounds for 8 months out of each year, and have it end each year just after Thanksgiving with a great big year-end event where you'd have both the tail end of the fall harvest produce along with, arts and crafts or whatever. Why don't you have a farmer's market at the county fairgrounds? Isn't that a logical thing to do? And that's one thing I think that everyone listening to my voice right now should put on their to-do list, is contact your county fair board.
James, if people want to follow up on your work, you're a prolific producer of content online. Where can they get connected?
Well, certainly at SurvivalBlog.com. It's been posted daily since 2006. All the archives there are fully available, free of charge. I recommend that people dive into those archives. They're searchable. Print out the most important articles. That's your kind of worst case scenario binder. Those articles, just in case we have a grid down collapse and you can't access the internet. But take full advantage of those resources. Again, it's survivalblog.com.
I forgot to ask you one thing, because you talked about vendors at farmers markets. You imagine them being willing to take silver and even treating it as a premium form of payment. Could you give us an update? Because you've been a pioneer in this in the last year here, taking silver for payment on your collectibles gun sale site. How has that been going? Have you seen a reception of that?
It's gone very well, although I've noticed in the last month that the number of people willing to send me payment in silver has dropped off dramatically. I think that's because people are starting to hoard silver. But for the last year and a half, while I've taken silver, a huge number of people have taken advantage of the fact that I now actually literally price all of my antique guns in pre-1965 silver prices. And then I have a multiplier if people want to pay in Federal Reserve notes. Right now, that multiplier is 23.8. So you take the silver price, multiply it by 23.8, and that gives you the dollar price if you want to write me a check or send me a postal money order. The main reason I did that, well, it was really twofold. I did want to increase my family's stockpile of silver, but mainly I wanted to have that as a teaching tool to have people recognize that what they're carrying around in their pockets and what they have in their bank balances electronically is not real money. Their real money is in the form of silver. And I chose pre-1965 silver just because I could have a multiplier and I wouldn't have to have some fractional thing for silver rounds, for example. But I wanted that as a teaching tool to wake people up and get them thinking very seriously about what they'll do in the event of a dollar crisis, because I think silver will come to the fore very quickly.
Well, we're always grateful for your visits here, Jim, and just wanted we'll put a link to your site, survivalblog.com, in the description of this video so people can find you quickly. And as always, we're grateful for your presence here with us on Liberty and Finance.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And I'll be praying that all of your viewers and listeners take what we've talked about today very seriously, and they get serious about providing for their family no matter what happens economically. It's time to stock up, team up, and train up. God bless you all.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we will let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be double boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Elijah, my brother Kaiser, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.